French lab.
All right, buckle up, because today we are diving into some seriously wild territory. We're talking YouTube transcripts about, wait for it, talking to reptiles.
You weren't kidding about wild, were you?
I'm dead serious. We're going deep into the mind of this guy, James True, and his unique perspective on, well, pretty much everything.
You know, I have to admit, when you first sent me these transcripts, I was a little skeptical talking to reptiles. I wasn't sure what to make of it.
Right. It sounds like something out of like a David Lynch movie or something.
Yeah.
But once you get past the initial weirdness, there's actually some really thought-provoking stuff in there.
I was surprised. It's like he's this generation's Carl Sagan or something, but instead of the cosmos, he's exploring like the inner space of our brains.
And one of the first things that really jumped out at me was this idea of the triune brain. Like, he's saying our brains are literally 3 layers deep. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept. It's this idea that, like, imagine your brain as a house, right? And the ground floor, the oldest part, that's what they call the reptilian brain.
Okay, a brain house. I like where this is going.
So this reptilian brain, it's all about survival instincts, like fight, flight, find food, that kind of stuff, right? Just pure hardwired responses.
So if I'm suddenly, like, craving a whole bag of chips at 3 a.m., that's my inner lizard taking over.
Exactly. And he calls it the ID. Like, that's where our really primitive urges come from.
Makes sense. So are we just slaves to these primal urges then? I mean, is that what True's saying?
He's not saying we're totally ruled by our reptilian brains, but he's definitely saying we can't ignore them. It's like, they're still a part of us, even if we don't always want to admit it.
Okay, so we're not just mindless reptiles running around. So what's on the second floor of this brain house then?
All right, so the second floor is where things get really interesting. This is the mammalian brain, as True calls it, and he actually breaks it down into 2 parts, Epimetheus and Prometheus.
Wait, like from Greek mythology, weren't they like gods or something?
Exactly, you know your myths. But it's actually a pretty clever way to think about it, because Epimetheus, he was like the god of like hindsight. And this part of our brain, it's all about learning from our past experiences. It's what remembers getting burned by that hot stove so we don't touch it again.
And Prometheus is the planner, right? The one who's always thinking ahead, trying to anticipate what might happen.
Exactly. Prometheus is all about foresight, about being able to imagine future possibilities, for better or for worse. And Truma argues that this ability to project ourselves into the future, to imagine both pleasure and pain, you know, that's a key part of what makes us human.
So we've got the survival instincts of the reptile. We've got the emotional memory of the mammal. What is it that makes the top floor, the human brain, so special? What's up there?
All right, well, the top floor, this is where things get really meta. This is the neocortex, and it's basically the command center for all our higher level thinking. Language, complex thought, self-awareness, it's all happening up here.
So it's like the executive suite of our brains.
Exactly, but, and this is a big but, True stresses that even though this human brain is super advanced, it's still built on top of those older, more primal structures. Like, think about it. It's like a luxury penthouse perched on top of an ancient foundation. We might have all the fancy gadgets and modern amenities up there, but we can't ignore the fact that the whole building is still subject to, like, the laws of physics, you know?
So no matter how evolved we think we are, we're still carrying around those ancient instincts, those, like, reptilian whispers in our ears. It's kind of freaky when you think about it, right? Like, how much control do we really have?
That's exactly what True wants us to question. He uses this great analogy. He compares it to, like, a fighter pilot with a super advanced jet. You've got all this technology at your fingertips, all this power, but the controls are still wired to your gut instincts, you know, your deepest fears and desires.
Okay, that is kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
So how do we become better pilots then? How do we learn to reconcile these different parts of ourselves?
Well, True says the first step is understanding the fuel that drives all 3 levels of our brain, something he calls qualia.
Qualia. What is qualia? Is that like some new age thing?
Not exactly. It's simpler than it sounds. Think of it like the feeling of an experience. Not the actual thing that happens, but like how it hits your senses, the emotional flavor it leaves behind.
Okay, so like the difference between, say, reading about skydiving and actually jumping out of a plane.
Exactly. It's the difference between knowing something and really feeling it.
And that's why he says pain is the foundation of our experience? That doesn't sound very fun.
Right. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but True argues that pain, maybe even more than pleasure, it's what actually forces us to pay attention, to learn, to evolve. Think about it, like we form our most vivid memories around painful experiences, right? Because our brains are wired to avoid repeating those mistakes.
So pleasure is just the absence of pain. That's kind of bleak, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, True would say it's more complicated than that. He suggests that pleasure is more like a form of pain that we've just gotten used to, you know? It's a sensation that we've learned to interpret in a positive way.
Okay, I think I need an example because my brain's starting to hurt trying to wrap itself around this.
Yeah. Okay, think about spicy food. For some people, that burning sensation, that's pure pain, right? They can't handle it. But then you've got other people, they love it, it's pleasurable for them. Same physical sensation, but the qualia, the feeling, it's totally different based on like your individual experience, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's making me think about how much of our lives are driven by this pursuit of feeling, this need for intense qualia, even if it means experiencing some discomfort, you know?
Think about those Sarah McLachlan commercials with the sad music and the shelter dogs.
Ugh, those get me every time.
Right. They make us cry, maybe even feel a little guilty, but we still watch them.
So they're manipulating us with these, like, sad feelings.
Not necessarily manipulating, but they're definitely triggering something. Those commercials, they're designed to create a very specific qualia response in our brains. It's that feeling of empathy, of urgency that makes us reach for our wallets.
Wow. This is getting deep. So how do we learn to navigate this world of qualia, this constant bombardment of sensations and emotions? Yeah. Are we just at the mercy of our brains and their need for intense feelings?
That's where things get really interesting, because True says we've been overlooking a really crucial tool, our sixth sense, interoception.
Wait, 6? I thought there were only 5.
You and everyone else. But True, he's adamant that interoception, this awareness of our internal state, is just as important as any of our external senses.
What is it exactly?
It's basically our ability to feel what's going on inside our own bodies, like our heartbeat, our digestion, our breath. It's the feeling of being in array, our bodies, not just, looking at them from the outside.
So it's like our internal radar, constantly scanning for signals from our organs and systems.
Right. And True believes that this interoceptive sense plays a huge role in shaping our emotions, our reactions, even how we interact with other people, all this stuff we don't even realize.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What does any of this have to do with interacting with other people? Tell me more about this interoception thing.
Okay, so True, he thinks that we're constantly picking up on all these subtle cues from others' bodies, right? Like their posture, their breathing, even their scent. And he argues that without even realizing it, we're subconsciously pacing each other all the time.
Pacing? What do you mean, like we're in a race?
No, not like that. It's like, okay, imagine two people walking side by side. Their steps will naturally start to synchronize after a while, right?
Yeah, I noticed that.
So True says something similar happens with our energy. Like, we unconsciously match our breathing, our movements, even our emotional states to the people around us. It's like our reptilian brains are sizing each other up, trying to decide if someone is a potential ally or a threat. It's like our reptilian brains are constantly checking for compatibility, trying to determine if someone is a potential ally or a threat.
So we're basically walking lie detectors. That's kind of intense.
It is kind of like that.
Sure.
True says our bodies are way more honest than our words. Like, you might say you're fine, but your jaw's clenched, you're breathing weird, your body's telling a different story.
So if I want to, really connect with someone, I should try to, match their energy, their pace. Is that what he's saying?
Well, he'd say it's not about being fake, it's more about being genuine, but also, being aware of the energy you're putting out there.
Okay, so no Jedi mind tricks. Got it.
Yeah.
But back to this idea that we're only picking up on, a tiny fraction of what's really going on around us. You were comparing it to, what was it, a microfiche viewer?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine you're looking through that viewer, right, and you see this tiny dot on the fiche. But that dot, it's actually a whole photograph, a whole world of information, but you need the viewer to see it all. True believes our senses are kind of like that. We're only seeing a small sliver of a much bigger, more complex picture.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. So what kind of stuff are we missing out on?
Well, take our sense of smell, for example. You know how most animals, they rely on scent for, almost everything?
True. My dog could sniff out a pizza crust from, a mile away.
Exactly. Finding food, attracting mates, sensing danger, the whole 9 yards, it's survival.
But we're not exactly, bloodhounds, are we?
We're not. But True argues that we've basically suppressed our sense of smell way more than we realize. He calls it a dangling cave, this sensory organ that we've kind of just shut down in favor of our other senses, mainly our vision.
Why would we do that? What's so scary about a little smell?
That's the million-dollar question, right? True thinks it might be connected to this thing about humans, this need to create a separate self, this I that's distinct from the world around us.
Hold on, I'm trying to follow this. Our sense of smell, our sense of self, how are those two things connected?
So our sense of smell, it goes straight to our limbic system, the emotional center of our brains, right? Bypasses all that higher level thinking and triggers these immediate visceral reactions.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Like, certain smells can trigger really strong memories. Or, like, the smell of a certain perfume might remind me of a specific person. It's powerful stuff.
Exactly, but those are just like surface level examples. True suggests that our sense of smell might be picking up on a whole other layer of information, a kind of primal communication, but we're just not conscious of it.
Wait, so you're saying we're subconsciously smelling each other's emotions? That's straight out of the X-Files.
I know, it sounds crazy, right? But think about it. Animals release pheromones all the time. They use them to communicate all sorts of stuff. True suggests that humans might have a similar system, but we've just like overridden it because it'd be too much for our conscious minds to deal with.
So we're basically blind to this whole other dimension of reality, this world of scent and pheromones that's influencing our interactions all the time.
That's what True's saying. And he thinks that this suppression, it might actually be necessary for us to, function in these complex human societies we've built.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being at a party and like actually smelling everyone's anxieties and hidden agendas?
Right. It'd be total sensory overload.
Maybe ignorance is bliss sometimes. Still makes you think, though. So we've got this reptilian brain whispering in our ear, this limited set of senses, a whole dimension of reality we're blind to. How do we even begin to make sense of any of this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. But luckily, True doesn't just leave us hanging. He gives us some tools for understanding our experience, even with all its weird contradictions and limitations.
Okay, give me some of that true wisdom.
He's really big on interoception, being aware of our internal state, listening to those subtle cues from our bodies and our emotions. He argues that by paying attention to our interoception, like those gut feelings we get, those intuitive nudges, that's how we can start to make more conscious, aligned choices.
So it's all about, like, learning to trust our gut, even when it doesn't make sense logically.
It's not just blindly following your gut, but it's about being more aware of those internal signals, learning to recognize the difference between a fear-based reaction and a genuine intuition, which is tricky.
That's got to be tough to decipher those signals. So how do we do that? Do we need to, like, take up meditation or something?
True's not really into prescribing any specific practices. He's more about find what works for you, experiment. But he does say that even simple stuff like paying attention to your breath, noticing the sensations in your body, being more aware of your emotional patterns, even small stuff like that can make a big difference.
So it's about like slowing down, being more present, more mindful of what's going on inside.
Exactly. He argues that the more self-aware we become, the more it affects everything else. Our relationships, our work, even how we see the world around us, it all starts to shift.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued by this whole interoception thing, gotta be honest.
Yeah.
But we haven't even touched on his ideas about like identity and stuff. Doesn't he think our sense of self is basically an illusion?
He does. True's pretty adamant that our identities, they're not fixed, they're fluid. They're these constantly shifting stories we tell ourselves, these narratives we create based on our experiences, our beliefs, how we were raised, all of it.
So we're not really who we think we are.
Hmm.
That's a bit unsettling, don't you think?
It's not that they're meaningless, more like they're not set in stone. True uses this analogy of masks, We all wear different masks depending on the situation. Like, you don't act the same way at a job interview as you do at a concert.
Totally. I'm like a completely different person depending on who I'm with. So what's the point of all these masks? Why not just be like our raw, unfiltered selves all the time?
Well, he'd say those masks serve a purpose. They help us navigate social situations, build relationships, and function in society. Imagine if we all just said and did whatever we felt like all the time.
Yeah, that would be chaos.
Exactly. But here's the thing. True also points out that sometimes we get so used to wearing these masks, they become so ingrained that we lose touch with our authentic selves.
We get so caught up in playing the role that we forget who we are underneath it all.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how that would happen.
And that's when those masks, they stop being helpful and start creating suffering. We feel fake, anxious, even depressed because we're not really being true to ourselves.
So how do we break free from these limiting identities? Do we just ditch all our masks and go full wild child?
Not exactly. Remember, he sees those masks as having a purpose, even if they can be stifling. It's not about getting rid of them completely, it's more about being aware of them. Recognizing when they're helping us and when they're holding us back.
So it's like become more aware of the roles we're playing, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, and then choose the ones that feel more authentic, more us.
Exactly. And True believes that this process of self-discovery, of shedding old masks and trying on new ones, it's not a one-time thing, it's a journey.
It's like we're constantly evolving, constantly becoming more of who we're meant to be. It's exciting, but also a little scary at the same time.
Right. Absolutely. But True's big thing is don't take it all so seriously. Approach it with a sense of curiosity, compassion, and playfulness. Have some fun with it.
Good advice.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the seriousness of it all. At the end of the day, we're all just a bunch of talking reptiles trying to figure things out.
Something like that. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. The human experience is this big, messy, beautiful mystery. And instead of trying to figure it all out, maybe we should just embrace it.
I like that. So we've got this cosmic mystery happening, but it's not all like doom and gloom. He's got some pretty wild ideas about how this whole human experience might actually be part of something much bigger. Something like a cosmic algorithm. Did I get that right?
You did. Yeah, he's got this whole thing about the human experience as an algorithm, which sounds kind of out there, but it's actually pretty mind-blowing when you really think about it.
I'm starting to think True's been sneaking into my dreams and planting these ideas. It's a lot to process, but there's something really freeing about it, too. Like, if we're all part of this grand cosmic dance, maybe it's okay to stumble a little, to improvise, to make it up as we go along.
That's a great way to put it. And it speaks to True's emphasis on embracing the unknown, on accepting that we don't have all the answers. He's not offering a rigid dogma, but a set of tools for navigating this messy, unpredictable thing we call life.
Speaking of messy and unpredictable, we haven't even touched on his ideas about identity. From what I gathered, True thinks our sense of self is basically an illusion, right? A story we tell ourselves to make sense of the world.
Exactly. True argues that our identities are fluid, constantly evolving narratives that we construct based on our experiences, our beliefs, and our social conditioning.
So, we're not really who we think we are.
It's more nuanced than that. True isn't saying that our identities are meaningless, but rather that they're not fixed or absolute. He uses the analogy of a mask. We all wear different masks depending on the situation, the people we're with, the roles we're playing.
Okay, I can relate to that. I'm definitely not the same person at a work conference that I am at a karaoke bar with my friends. But what's the point of all these masks? Why not just be ourselves all the time?
Well, True argues that these masks serve a purpose. They help us navigate social situations, build relationships, and function within society.
So it's like we need a certain amount of social camouflage to avoid freaking each other out with our raw, unfiltered selves.
That's one way to look at it. But True also points out that these masks can become so ingrained, so habitual, that we lose touch with our authentic selves.
We get so caught up in playing the role that we forget who we are underneath it all.
Exactly. And that's when these masks can become a source of suffering, leading to feelings of inauthenticity, anxiety, and even depression.
So how do we break free from these, limiting identities? Do we need to throw away all our masks and just run wild and free?
True wouldn't necessarily recommend that approach. Remember, he sees these masks as having a purpose, even if they can sometimes become stifling. It's not about getting rid of them entirely, but about becoming aware of them, about recognizing when they're serving us and when they're holding us back.
So it's about becoming more conscious of the roles we're playing, the stories we're telling ourselves, and choosing the ones that feel most authentic.
Exactly. And True believes that this process of self-discovery, of shedding old masks and trying on new ones, is an ongoing journey, not a destination.
It's like we're constantly evolving, constantly becoming more of who we truly are. It's both exciting and a little terrifying, isn't it?
Absolutely. But True reminds us that there's also a lot of humor and joy to be found in this process of self-discovery. He encourages us to approach it with curiosity, with compassion, and with a sense of playfulness.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get bogged down in the seriousness of it all. But at the end of the day, we're all just a bunch of talking reptiles trying to figure things out, right?
Something like that. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from True's work, that the human experience, for all its complexities and contradictions, is ultimately a mystery to be embraced, not a problem to be solved.
That's a great note to end on. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to chew on. It's like True has handed us this whole new toolkit for understanding ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us.
And like any good toolkit, the real magic happens when we start using it.
So true. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. A huge thanks to you for joining me on this wild ride through the mind of James True. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another thought-provoking exploration. Until then, stay curious.